If you wish to continue, you're more than welcome.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Knopper. Let's try this again. Mr. Spear?
Can you guys see the 5-year? Oh, I didn't share.
Hold on. There you go, Chris. It should be sharing now.
Great, folks, as I was saying before, under the 5-year budget, we currently do show a surplus that rates on the wharf were increased 3 or 4 years ago in anticipation of these vital repairs being needed. And so, as you can see, under the surplus line, that we are showing a small surplus of between $20,000 and $27,000 over the next 5 years. So if you deduct the $80,000 in debt repayments, tax revenue will have to cover about, between $55,000 and $50,000 worth of payments over and above the extra revenue generated by the wharf. Now, I'm going to say this: if it's paid through a tax increase, that represents about 1.6 cents per hundred. And I use the word "if" very loosely here because there's other avenues to cut even in future capital projects to help offset that. But I'm just trying to provide in relative terms to what it would mean to the town budget. So currently there's 3 options for you. It's to replace it with a similar project, concrete construction, and the armor stone infill. So to replace with the current wooden structure, so there's what our wharf has traditionally looked like for many years, with going down the length to the pier head, wooden sides and things. As you can see from there, you can see kind of the damage on the first portion of the wharf. I think something that's really important to understand, though, is that the whole wharf isn't a wooden structure anymore, that it has been gradually replaced over several years. And so the only original wharf component is about the first third. The second third is concrete on top of a wooden structure. And of course, the final portion where the pier head is concrete on top of steel. In order to maintain a heritage look, even if we go with another option, it's really creating things like wooden wheel guards, and those poles, which are called sacrificial piles and posts, can be used to put on the outside to give it the look that people are used to. And so there's another look from the end of the wharf. The current cost of this, looked at about a year and a half ago, was about $3 million. But with the insane increase in construction costs, especially of wood in the last year, it's gone up to $3.4 million. And an analysis done by your engineer, the life cycle cost is about $6.1 million. Now, the pros of this: it maintains the original look of the wharf, which seems to be very important to many people. And it certainly will blend in better with the remaining structure. A problem with it is when it comes in 50 years, and when you're talking about municipal assets, you got to think decades in the future, not just over the next few years. It will be harder to accommodate for sea level rise. We will be able to build it for the first 1.5 meters, but there isn't as easy a plan or sorry, not 1.5 meters, 0.5 meter. There's not as easy a plan in 50 years to go the other 0.5 meter. Of course, as we know, wood deteriorates more quickly. Consequently, there could be more cost going into the future. And there is a smaller width compared to the infill, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Then we're talking about the armor stone infill to replace the approach. And so we've seen these slides before, and I'll go through them relatively quickly, Your Worship. But you can see a little over a third of the wharf is taken up by a much wider base. Provides a lot of rock infill that will have a detraction or a change, if you will, to the view as you're sitting at Market Wharf or from the boating community coming in. This is a bird's eye view from outside. This is more on the inside, looking into what it would look like from beach level. And then at street level, it's less of a view. Remembering these are renderings, that it could be changed a little bit. But the belief is if you're coming from King Street down, you probably won't notice that as much. And then just a couple more views. Now, one of the things that we talked about was the current deck width, which under this, or currently is about 24 feet. With the infill, it jumps up to 22 meters. The important thing to remember is that the driving lanes doesn't change much. It's really on top of the infill going out, which will provide room if wanted for walkways or potentially a park space with picnic tables and things is one benefit to consider. And staff went out and just to get an idea of what that looks like. And so the infill width would be about between the middle of the Island Quest building to about the front of the parking spot on the right-hand side. So it's significantly increased in the width almost 3 times. It's a little bit more at it's 3.2 million is a little bit less than the other. It does have a significant less 60-year life cycle cost. Primarily, once it's in, the wood and fill should last forever. If there's surges and stuff that deteriorate some of the structure as it did at the point over the past couple of years, easily replaced, but the chances of the whole structure being destroyed are very minimal. Now, some of the pros of this is that water width allows for more uses. There's a lower cost, and it is easier to raise an additional meter if sea level rise modeling stays consistent. So if we assume in 100 years in 1 meter, it'll be easier. And there's some questions why it's so wide. Well, that's the reason, is that it's built in a pyramid style in order to, so it's not straight up and down like a seawall. It's to absorb the forces of the waves and just break it gradually. And so if they go up another half a meter in 50 years, you'll lose some of that width as top as more armor stone is put in to create the next level going up. One big issue that has come up that will have to be thought of is about you will lose the current crib to repair boats. It's in a very good spot where it is now. If we moved on the other side of the wharf, you are going to have less of a time to work on your boats, but it can be moved. It shouldn't be the only thing that makes the change, but a lot of the boat owners have expressed concern about the potential lose of that asset or that service. Of course, a lot of people have said they consider it less visually appealing, that it detracts from the view in St. Andrews. We've had a few who say, they won't say it looks better, but that it doesn't distract as much as said. So there's kind of a mixture in the community. But something that has come up over and over, and staff can't answer that right now, is about the potential tidal impacts that it could have on the change of the flow within the basin there. And it could be substantial, and that won't be determined until we do an environmental impact assessment. And that won't be guarded until council decides if this is even worth considering or not, just due to the sheer cost. So the last one we'll look at is a concrete structure with armor stone seawall. And so it looks very similar to what we have now, that it's just a concrete deck on concrete piles, somewhat similar to a bridge. But from an aerial view, it almost looks the same. Something that doesn't show up in these pictures, but would be incorporated into future design, is that we continue with the poles that you see on the outside. So the piles that go along the outside of the wharf, which would turn this structure more back into the heritage look. We'd probably also look at adding wooden wheel guards. So the wheel guards are the 8x8 boards that are on both sides of the wharf right now to prevent anyone from driving off, essentially. So that little bit of cosmetic work would go a long ways to making the structure look exactly like the rest of it does for the last several decades. Again, the width isn't going to add very much there, but it'll be a much stronger structure. And again, very similar views you would have now, right now on King Street. And from the outside looking in, as you see, you have the rock on the right-hand side currently in front of Market Square. And then we'll also look, not included in these, but it's brought up and staff will support it, is that the seawall in front of the Day Adventure Center actually belongs to the town. And so the rock along both seawalls probably should be extended in order to preserve both of those assets. So the cost is a little higher than the infill at 3.46 million, but because that is a stronger element, its life cycle costs are a little less than the wooden structure talked about earlier. So it does resemble this traditional style more. It visually transitions into the current period much better. It doesn't look as you will with a wide section that goes into a narrow section. And certainly it'll have less impact on a tidal flow than if we book the infill. We do lose the extra width for the walkway, about $300,000 more in the initial cost, $800,000 more in life cycle costs. Another thing that has come up that we have to discuss with the engineers a little more, that there could be increased costs if done over the winter. So the cement would have to be heated. I didn't get into the final numbers, but we have to talk, because this can be done over several years, and maybe we could just do it in sections. Didn't have to do it over the bare metal winter. So deconstruction could be taken to remove what's there, and then very early spring they could start the pours to pour the cement possibly, but that would have to be discussed with the engineers before a final decision is made on that. So in a very quick summary, the capital cost of the wooden structure was about 3.4 million with a 60-year life cycle cost of 6.1. The infill, 3.2 million with a life cycle cost of 4.5. And the concrete structure is 3.45 million with a life cycle cost of about 5.3 million. All significant investments for the town of St. Andrews, and that's why it makes it such a significant project for council to consider. There were a few questions that came from the prior presentation I'll address quickly. I think we talked about the extra width, that essentially that it was wider so that they could build up on it in 50 years to get that extra half a meter and to get us closer to the original width of the driving lane. The environmental impact assessment, people asked about doing multiple copies of that. It just doesn't make any sense. It's extremely expensive and extremely time consuming. So the idea behind this is to see if council can eliminate any of the options. And then if they're off the table, then at least we can narrow it down to one or two and start to ask some more questions on what they prefer. And a question that was asked a couple of times is, why are we doing this now? Well, it's really two things. Is that it was driven, as discussed earlier, that the wooden structure is falling apart. There's no doubt about it. It's got at the end of its 7 years. There's significant dollars that the councils have been investing in this thing over the last decade and will continue to do so. Through this funding program, we're able to create a new asset that will last for many more decades without putting in this annual repairs. Then it was asked very quickly about widening, or like make a wider concrete structure if we wanted to include walkways and stuff, but the engineers didn't do a full cost analysis, but they said essentially double the width and double the cost. That essentially the town of St. Andrews, be both as treasurer and CAO, I wouldn't recommend going there because it's out of the financial capacity of the town to pay for that, in my opinion. So, Your Worship, I tried to make it fast, but unfortunately there's a lot of information to cover. So
Well, you had an
I'll
interruption.
go back to you and leave the floor open to questions from council or the public.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Spear. Appreciate it. Mr. Knopper, I think it's now time to open up the floor to those who wish to make comments to council.
No problem, Your Worship. I will note to the public that's on Zoom, we only accept questions via Zoom or by email at pnopper@townofstandrews.ca. That information is on Facebook. Each individual person on Zoom will have up to 5 minutes to provide comments or questions on the wharf designs to council. I will note that council can either respond to your questions or accept them as information for further review. So if a question or comment is not responded to, please don't take it to heart. It is just part of the process. So we'll do now is we'll start with the first one up. and it's Cole Design. And I will ask that you please say your first name, last name, and present your question or comment to council. So I will ask again, Cole Design. The floor is yours to council. Seeing no movement there, I'm going to go to our next one. Mr. Vic Miller, the floor to council is yours if you have questions or comments.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I've got a Dwayne and it looks like a Jessica. You have the floor to council. Please state your first name, last name, and your comments or questions.
There, it's Jessica Doucette. Dwayne and I both prefer kind of the seawall approach rather than the stones going out, and it is more of an aesthetic reasoning. But we were just here mainly to kind of get a full picture of what the town was looking at. But thank you very much for the description and clarity you guys have given with the project.
Thank you very much. I will go to the next one. I'll ask Steve. Steve, please say your first name, last name, and your questions to council.
Steve Saunders. And my question is, are we going to be able to get in contact with the engineer, CBCL? And because there's a group of us who would like to have some input into what gets looked at with regards to the environmental assessment.
I think I can answer that. I believe that's not an untoward request. And I think that if we get down to the point where we've selected an option, we're not going to do a full impact, as Mr. Spear said, on all the options. But once we make an option, certainly we would welcome expertise from the community on that front. So stay posted and we'll keep you posted on where we're at with that. And I don't see any problem with that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go to Ms. Kearney. Ms. Kearney, you have the floor to council.
Overall, it is a very tough decision. So my priority, of course, is to have a functioning wharf. And so how it's designed is not my biggest concern. It would have been an advantage to have the extra width for options of benches or little booths out on the wharf, but that's not the primary concern. The primary concern is to make sure that the wharf is functioning going forward for another 50 years, especially considering that the end of the wharf is fairly new and the second portion is in good shape, and it's just that first portion that needs some rescuing. I did think the concrete was a good option with the wood on the outside, so it looks traditional and that may not affect the tides. I would be concerned though, I didn't hear that before about the problem with building concrete in the cold. So it would concern me if we lost a whole summer building the wharf. We had a tough year last year. We think this year will also be tough. And then to potentially lose next summer would be quite devastating. So I potentially want more information on that of how that concrete could be built, and not affect a whole season, for example. I do appreciate that you looked into that the town does own the seawall, I think Chris Spear says, and that potentially the rock erosion along the Day Adventure Center would be carried through right to the end. So I appreciate Chris Spears looking into that, if I understood that correctly. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep, I'll go to, since I've got Lee on the table. Lee, you have the floor to council if you wish to present questions or comments.
I'm still just trying to get plugged in here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Council can hear you.
Okay, because I got bumped off the Zoom. I went onto Facebook and now I'm trying to get back on here. I guess one of the key questions is that I know we've got to move. The town has to move on this pretty quickly. is it possible to submit without a single design? Can you put in, let's say, 2 designs? And then, because the environmental impact, the modeling, the hydrodynamic modeling is going to be kind of critical to see what works. And, you know, if we need to move fast, maybe if we could say, oh, well, we've got, you know, 2 different designs and we'll decide once you give us the money, that would be a whole lot better. So is that a possibility, to not have to submit a single design?
I'll say yes, but I think it's gotten to the point, Your Worship, where council really needs to narrow it down so staff and engineering can move forward with the design. I appreciate what Ms. Sakaski's saying, but it's the longer we keep pushing this off, the harder it's going to be to make a decision. And I agree with you on the tidal impact questions. So it's really an issue if council buys into the rock infill or not, because I would say that both the concrete structure and the wooden structure would have about similar effects on the tide.
Yeah,
The
I think,
concrete structure, as presented, may actually be better than the wooden structure.
yeah, well, some of you already know, you know, have some environmental concerns, and there are a bunch of us that have been looking at that. But also I know from the chamber and others there, you know, there's the town identity thing. And I'm finding that, you know, while the stone jetty certainly has some, you know, some cost advantages, it's really inconsistent with the municipal plan objectives. And I'm really struggling with that. So I hope that's something that council's looking at.
Thank you. It is.
Yeah.
Ms. Sakaski, do you have any other further questions or comments for council?
No, not at this point, because I was just shuffling my papers, but thank you very much for letting me speak off the cuff here.
Thank you. I will go to our next one. It is an Alistair Fox. You have the floor to council if you wish to provide a question or comment.
My questions have been answered, where I think the Armor Rock is a very unattractive look for a heritage town like St. Andrews. So my preference would be for a concrete structure with a wooden facing. I'm concerned also about the shifting the infill that will happen with the tidal raise either side. When you look at the foot of Patrick Street and the way it has built up there, it's a good example of what could happen if you have a solid barrier there, like having the armor fill. So that's my point. That's my word. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. I will move to our next person, Mark James. You have the floor to council. You questions or comments? You can start now.
Thank you. I kind of agree with Alistair. I don't think the rock infill is the answer. I like the idea of a concrete approach to the wharf. In my previous life, you might say, I worked in the concrete industry my whole life. I used to run concrete plants in Alberta. I used to test concrete, and concrete is very doable. Sure, if you're going to do it in the wintertime, there are some hurdles to get over, but it's very doable. And so my vote would be for a concrete structure. Looks better, and I think that's the way to go. And that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. James. I am going to go to the last person here. It's new. Sorry, we do have somebody coming on. New PC, here's your opportunity. Do you have a question or comment for council? Please state your full name. Seeing no movement, I'm just adding one person to the Zoom here, Your Worship. Just give me 1 second. And Miss Vincent, you do have the floor to council if you have a question or comment regarding the wharf designs. Miss Vincent?
Sorry. Oh, no, sorry. I'm waiting for the next meeting. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
So sorry.
Your worship, that's all of the people from Zoom. I do have one email that has come in. It is a longer email. It is from Jenny Samard. I will just summarize that she's deeply worried about the current proposals and projects, especially with the rock, in order to raise and salvage the front part of the wharf. She has concerns as a biologist about the wildlife and the waterfront and the strong currents and what could happen to the ecosystem, as well as being a tourism venture company and owner, saddened and deeply concerned about the historic zone being buried by sediments, and looking at more of that. I will send the full letter to council. And I have one more person joining Zoom council, but I would limit that at this point. Any further comments can come through writing. Mr. Joe Harrison, you have the floor to council.
Thank you, Paul. I've written a submission already on behalf of the St. Andrews Yacht Club, and information I received from other folks who use the wharf. I think our main concern has to do with the tidal effects. And as Alistair mentioned, if you look at the end of Patrick Street, you can see what even a small rock structure can do. We're all citizens as well, and the tax implications or the cost implications are a concern to us as well. But there is one thing, and that is that St. Andrews really belongs to all New Brunswickers. Those of us who are fortunate enough to live here are really charged with its care and charged to maintain this heritage. I think it's clear that the heritage will be certainly changed or affected by one of the options. They are building a wooden dock in Back Bay right now, and I think the fisheries station here is also doing some work with a wooden dock structure. That's my comment, is that we really need to look after this on behalf of all New Brunswickers. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Nopper.
Your worship, as I recommended, I do have one person that did join. I could ask if they want to ask council if you're fine with that.
Yep, I'm fine with that, and then we'll have to move on to the next meeting.
Yep. Barry Craig, do you have any comments or questions for council on the wharf designs?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you. Your worship.
Sorry, Mr. Nopper, but Councillor Drew's had his hand raised up for a little bit, so maybe before we conclude this meeting, we'll let Councillor Drew.
Yeah.
Very quick one. I noticed that we have Marissa Brown that's been online and we haven't gotten her yet.
Your worship, I have a letter in the comment section that says from Marissa Brown, no comments for this portion, but thank you. I may comment on the short-term rental portion.
Thank you, Mr. Nopper. We're right at the deadline here, so I will ask for a motion to adjourn this meeting so that we can go on to the next meeting.
That's our move.
Thank you. And the seconder?
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Hearing none, we're adjourned. And now